All scientific theories and laws require evidence. Evolution is just the same. That's what we'll be looking at in this chapter. Evidence for Evolution, Chapter 21. The most significant aspect of Darwin's work was his study of the finches of the Galapagos Islands. While he was there, he collected 31 different finch specimens from 3 different islands and brought them back to England to be identified. It turned out that he had discovered 14 different species. The only thing that was truly different about them was the beak size and shape. Darwin believed that their beaks had changed based on the foods that they ate. This was the basis of his evolutionary theory. Peter and Rosemary Grant returned to the Galapagos Islands and studied the ground finch. Their goal was to determine if Darwin's theory was correct. They discovered through their studies that when the island was in a drought, the beaks of the ground finch grew thicker, larger, and stronger. And when the rains returned, the birds' beaks returned to their original size. This happened because drought causes the shells of the seeds that they eat to get thicker. Birds with stronger beaks were able to eat the tougher seeds. When the rains returned, the shells returned to their normal thickness, and so bird beaks also returned to normal. Their discovery verified Darwin's theory. As we talk about evidence for evolution, we're going to look at short-term, being decades to thousands of years, and long-term, being millions of years. Our first short-term evidence are the peppered moths that we talked about before. Remember, those moths had the white with black spot coloration on their wings because they rested on trees that were that same color. When the Industrial Revolution filled the atmosphere with smoke and ash, that bark turned to black. Only the moths then that had that coloration were able to survive. So we got to see an example of microevolution that occurred over a few decades. Artificial selection, or breeding by man, we've also talked about. We talked about how we bred greyhounds for speed and huskies for density of the coat and the strength of the muscles so that they could pull things through the snow. We've done the same with plants. We've changed corn into what we eat today. We've turned tomatoes into the round, fleshy fruit that we eat today. We've increased the size of cows so that we have more meat and we have more milk, and done the same thing for chickens. The chickens of today are twice the size as their ancestors, as same with the number of eggs that they produce per clutch. Long-term evidence will begin with fossil evidence. Fossil evidence is going to provide a record of the course of life through time. It's going to show changes in biological diversity. We're going to see when species drop off due to extinction and when growth bursts back after those extinctions. We're also going to be able to see changes within species as their physical structure changes. One of the most important pieces of fossil evidence is seen on the screen. This is Archaeopteryx. It's a 165 million year old fossil, and it's the intermediate between the dinosaurs and the birds. If you look at the picture, you'll see that it has teeth and a bony tail like a dinosaur and feathers like a bird. Transitional skeletons are another important piece of fossil evidence. They show the transition, the change from the ancient animal to the modern animal, showing the adaptations that occurred along the way. If you look at our picture, look at the top and the bottom of that top square, you'll see our ancestor. This is the one that walked on land. It moved to the sea, but was still probably able to walk on land in a similar fashion as the sea lions, so the back legs got smaller. As you look at the bottom of the page, then you look at the next ancestor. Those back legs again got smaller, So now the motion of swimming was more of an up and down rather than a side to side, and that leads us to the modern whale. We're going to move from fossil evidence to anatomical evidence, or in this case we're looking at physical structures. And our first are homologous structures. These are structures with different appearances and slightly different functions that are all derived from the same body part in a common ancestor. And common ancestor is the important part. My example in the picture are the bones in the forelimb of mammals. In this case, it's the same structure, the forelimb, and in each case it's used for movement. Now granted, in humans we don't use our arms for movement once we become adults, but when we're children, when we're babies, before we know how to walk, we do use them for crawling. As you can see, as vertebrates have evolved, the same bones have sometimes been put to different uses, but they're still recognizable. So we have same bone structure, different functions, but same ancestor. In analogous structure, we have the structure in different species that have the same appearance and the same structure or function, but they have evolved separately, meaning they do not have a common ancestor. An example of this would be wings. Wings of insects and wings of birds. They look similar in appearance, they're used for flying, but we have different ancestors. The jointed legs of insects and the jointed legs of vertebrates. Again, same approximate appearance, same function, different ancestors. The strongest anatomical evidence supporting evolution comes from the comparison of early embryonic development. Embryos of different types of vertebrates often appear very similar early in their development, but only become more different as time goes on. For example, early vertebrate embryos all possess pharyngeal pouches. In humans, these pouches will develop into glands and ducts. In fish, they will develop into gills. All vertebrates, including humans, also have tails early in their embryonic development. Those tails will shrink as the embryo develops, but they still remain as our tailbone. Another type of evidence are vestigial structures. Vestigial structures have no apparent function, but resemble structures from an ancestor. If we look at the picture of the whale, you'll find bones in the whale's tail that are remnants of its land ancestors' legs. You'll find vestigial hip bones in boa constrictors. And for those of us who can wiggle their ears, those muscles are also vestigial structures. Another piece of evidence is the idea of the imperfection. These are organisms that have adaptations that appear to be workable solutions, but they're not perfect solutions. And I have two examples. The first is the vertebrate eye. There are nerves that actually run in front of the retina. The retina is where we absorb incoming light. And that nerve actually obscures the light as it comes in, creating blind spots. The mollusks, which are the ancestors of the vertebrates, don't have this problem, suggesting that as the vertebrates adapted, they changed the eye that they already had, but it wasn't a perfect change. My second example of imperfections are the giraffes. If you look at the picture on the left, this is a fossil of a pliosaur. It has 76 vertebrae for extensive flexibility. The giraffe only has 7 vertebrae because the lack of genetic variation that was necessary to evolve a larger number of vertebrae wasn't there. The bones of the vertebrae had to get larger so that the neck could get longer, which means you have a longer neck, but it's not very flexible. A workable solution, but not a perfect one. Biogeography is also an example of evidence for evolution. Biogeography is the study of the geographic distribution of species. Scientists have discovered that different geographical areas sometimes have groups of plants and animals that are very similar in appearance to those in other areas, even though the organisms may only be distantly related. Natural selection appears to have favored parallel evolutionary adaptations in similar environments. In other words, you've got two different environments that are similar, two different organisms that are similar. The ancestors were similar. And as they adapted, since they were adapting to a similar physical environment, the final product looked similar. An example of this is the bush baby on the left and the lemur in the center. Island biogeography is the study of the geography and the animals that are on islands in comparison to that of the mainland. Many islands have never been connected to the mainland at all. Species arrive on the islands in a variety of different ways. Some fly, some float, some swim, some get blown there accidentally. Colonizers begin by occupying the same or similar niches that they had on the mainland. Then they have to evolve to fit their new environment. Over time, that evolution leads to brand new species. Our last piece of evidence is the idea of convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is defined as similar forms having evolved in different isolated areas because of similar selective pressures in similar environments, meaning that the environment where they live, even though they're different in location, the physical characteristics of that habitat are so similar they create organisms that are similar in appearance. Again, I have two examples. The environment of North and South America and Australia are all very similar. Over time, the marsupial ancestors of North and South America went extinct as they were replaced by the placental mammals. Australia still has their marsupial populations, but they resemble the placental mammals on other continents. Our second example are the animals and the fish of the oceans. Because of the pressure of water pushing in all three dimensions and the currents of the ocean as the fish and the mammals move through the water, you end up with this streamlined shape. Whether it's a mammal like a dolphin, a fish, or a shark, they all have that streamlined shape because they all have that same physical ocean environment. This is the end of Chapter 21, Evidence for Evolution.